Is evolution still happening to you right now? Human evolution did not stop. It just stopped being obvious. Nobody's baby arrives with gills, or night vision, or an updated warranty. Instead, one inherited variant becomes slightly more common because the people carrying it leave slightly more surviving children. Then another does. Repeat that quietly enough times, and thousands of years later, some humans can drink milk as adults without getting sick. Some can live at altitudes that should leave them gasping. Some can hold their breath underwater long enough to make a lifeguard nervous. Some of these changes are recent enough that the people carrying them are alive right now, walking around you, completely unaware. The strange part isn't that you're still evolving. The strange part is what actually counts as an upgrade. Evolution has no image of the future. It doesn't aim at stronger, smarter, or better looking. It just changes populations whenever an inherited difference affects who has children, and how many. Survival only matters because surviving usually helps you reproduce. A gene that keeps you healthy until 90 but leaves you childless is, to evolution, a dead end. A gene that causes trouble at 60 but helps you survive an infection and have kids at 20 spreads anyway. Natural selection plans about as far ahead as a distracted teenager, and none of this happens to you personally. Training at altitude can raise your red blood cell count. Diving repeatedly can strengthen your body's diving reflex. None of that is evolution. Evolution needs the trait to be inherited, and it needs its frequency to shift across generations in a population, not in one lifetime. Here's where it's actually been caught in the act. Start with milk, because it's the clearest case there is. Every human baby produces lactase, the enzyme that breaks down the sugar in milk. In most mammals, including most humans throughout most of history, lactase production drops sharply after weaning. That makes sense. An adult wild animal doesn't usually have access to another species' refrigerator. Drink milk as an adult without lactase, and the undigested sugar feeds your gut bacteria instead, which respond with gas, cramps, and a very fast review of your life choices. Then, in multiple separate places, starting somewhere around 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, humans began herding cattle, sheep, goats, camels. Milk became a stable source of water, fat, protein, and calories in a world where all four of those things could be scarce. A mutation appeared near the lactase gene that kept it switched on into adulthood. It didn't appear once. It appeared independently in populations across Europe, East Africa, and parts of the Middle East. Different mutations, same solution, arrived at separately, because the same pressure showed up in separate places. This is evolution happening through culture. Humans domesticated animals. That changed the environment. The new environment made a specific gene valuable. The gene made the cultural habit even more useful. A cow became part of your ancestors' selective environment without ever being consulted. Here's the part that surprised researchers, though. Milk drinking didn't simply cause the gene to spread on its own timeline. Archaeological evidence shows people were herding and drinking dairy for a long time before lactase persistence became common in the population. Many groups processed milk into cheese or yogurt instead, which removes most of the lactose, sidestepping the problem entirely. The strongest advantage for the actual gene may have shown up specifically during famine or serious intestinal disease, when a safe, always available source of clean calories and water was the difference between surviving a bad year and not. Diarrhea from milk is a nuisance when food is abundant. It's a different problem entirely during starvation. So if you can drink a glass of milk with zero consequences, you're not the default human. In evolutionary terms, you're the unusual one. Most of human history ran on adults who couldn't. Altitude did something more dramatic. At high elevation, every breath delivers less oxygen. The obvious fix, and the one most human bodies actually reach for, is to make more red blood cells. More cells carrying oxygen sounds like a clean upgrade. It is, for a while. Push it too far, and the blood gets thick. The heart has to work harder to move it. The risk of clots, stroke, and chronic altitude sickness climbs. Pregnancy gets specifically dangerous because a developing fetus depends entirely on oxygen crossing the placenta. People living on the Tibetan Plateau have faced this problem for generations, from birth. Their solution wasn't to build more red blood cells than everyone else. It was the opposite. Many Tibetans carry variants near a gene called EPAS1, involved in how the body senses and responds to low oxygen. And these variants are associated with keeping hemoglobin levels comparatively restrained at altitude, instead of overcorrecting the way a lowlander's body typically does. Here's the detail that turns this from interesting into genuinely strange. Researchers tracing the origin of the most well-known version of this gene found it closely resembles a stretch of DNA from the Denisovans, an extinct human relative related to Neanderthals. Tens of thousands of years ago, ancestors of some modern humans interbred with Denisovans. Most of that inherited DNA got diluted away over time. This particular fragment didn't, because it turned out to be useful, and natural selection kept it in circulation. Tibetans are carrying genetic equipment borrowed from a completely different kind of human. And it's not the only answer to the same problem. Populations in the Andes and the Ethiopian highlands adapted to low oxygen too, through different physiology and different genetic signals. Same mountain, same problem, different biological solutions, arrived at independently. Evolution doesn't hand out one correct answer to a hard question. It just eliminates the answers that don't work and lets whatever's left keep going. The ocean did something to the human spleen that almost nobody thinks about. The Bajau are traditionally maritime communities across parts of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, known for breath-hold diving, hunting, and gathering underwater with minimal equipment, sometimes for extended periods on a single breath. Researchers comparing Bajau individuals to a nearby non-diving population found the Bajau had spleens roughly 50% larger on average. The spleen isn't just storage. During a dive, it contracts and releases a reserve of oxygen-rich red blood cells into circulation, essentially an internal oxygen tank. Marine mammals rely on enormous spleens as core diving equipment. Humans appear to be doing the same thing, at a smaller scale. The obvious explanation would be training, the same way exercise builds muscle. But Bajau individuals who didn't personally dive also had enlarged spleens, which points towards something inherited across the population, rather than something built during one person's lifetime. Genetic analysis has flagged signs of selection near a gene called PDE10A, possibly acting through thyroid hormone pathways that influence spleen size. It's compelling evidence from a limited sample, not a finished blueprint, and researchers are still working out the exact mechanism. The Bajau can't breathe underwater. They're still limited by oxygen, pressure, cold, and the same instinctive panic every human lung produces when it wants air. But generations of a specific way of life appear to have nudged a specific organ, quietly, without anyone deciding it should happen. Disease produces some of the strangest trades of all, because a pathogen doesn't just sit there like weather, it fights back. Malaria has been one of the most powerful forces shaping recent human evolution, precisely because it kills so many children before they can reproduce. The parasite invades red blood cells, so evolution has repeatedly altered those cells to fight back. The best-known example is the sickle cell variant in the HBB gene. Inherit one copy, and you typically get substantial protection against severe malaria at essentially no cost. Inherit two copies, and you can develop sickle cell disease, where red cells distort, block blood vessels, damage organs, and shorten life without proper care. Natural selection didn't fix this contradiction. It kept it exactly as it was. In places where malaria killed large numbers of children, people carrying one copy of the variant survived and reproduced more often than people carrying none. And that advantage was strong enough to keep the gene common, even though some of those carriers' own children would inherit two copies and the disease itself. Evolution accepted a serious genetic illness as the population-level price of malaria resistance. It never asked any individual child whether that trade felt fair. Plague left a similar signature on a much shorter timescale. During the Black Death in the 14th century, researchers examining ancient DNA from people who lived before, during, and after the pandemic identified strong signs of selection near an immune gene called ERAP2. A version associated with a fully functional form of the gene appears to have helped immune cells fight the plague bacterium more effectively. People carrying the protective version were more likely to survive, and the frequency of that version shifted measurably within just a few generations, evolution moving at a pace you can actually date against recorded history. But an immune system tuned for a medieval pandemic doesn't get gentler once the emergency ends. The same variants linked to stronger plague defense are today associated with a higher risk of inflammatory and autoimmune conditions, including Crohn's disease. That immune system evolved during a period when failing to attack hard enough could mean being dead within days. Some modern descendants are still paying for a threat that public health mostly ended centuries ago. This is the pattern running underneath almost every one of these stories. Selection rarely hands out a clean improvement. It shifts risk from one place to another. More clotting protection can also mean more clots. More immune aggression can also mean more autoimmune disease. More red blood cells can also mean thicker blood. A trait survives exactly as long as its local benefit outweighs its local cost in the specific environment it evolved in. And then humans go and change the environment. Before we go further, an honest caution, because this is exactly where a lot of viral claims about human evolution quietly go wrong. A trait becoming more common doesn't automatically mean evolution did it. Average height can rise because of better nutrition, with no genetic shift required at all. Earlier puberty can result from changes in energy availability. Nearsightedness can spike because children spend far more time indoors doing close-up work, not because eyes are evolving in real time. None of that requires a single gene frequency to move. Bodies respond to their environment directly every generation without needing inheritance to change at all. Even the frequently cited extra artery story deserves that same caution. During fetal development, a blood vessel called the median artery usually regresses as two other arteries take over, supplying the forearm. In some adults, it persists instead. One study found this persistent artery showing up more often in people born in the late 20th century than in people born in the late 19th. It made headlines as proof humans are evolving new anatomy in real time. But an anatomical trend increasing doesn't automatically prove why it's increasing. Maternal health, prenatal conditions, detection methods, and differences in exactly whose bodies got studied could all be shaping that number too. Until inherited gene frequencies are actually shown to be shifting, it's a genuinely interesting trend, not confirmed proof of evolution installing bonus plumbing. And for what it's worth, that plumbing isn't a clean upgrade either, since it can also compress a nerve and contribute to carpal tunnel symptoms. So, what can actually be said with confidence? As long as inherited differences keep affecting who has children and how many, humans keep evolving. Modern medicine now lets some people with once fatal genetic conditions survive and reproduce, which relaxes certain kinds of selection pressure without eliminating selection altogether. At the same time, entirely new pressures are showing up: novel pathogens, pollution, delayed childbearing, changed diets, dense cities, rising heat, and the social patterns that quietly shape who ends up having kids and when. Nobody can predict exactly which variant wins next. Air conditioning changes heat exposure before heat tolerance genes get a chance to matter. Medicine changes survival odds before a disease resistance gene can spread. Culture now moves faster than biology ever could. That speed might be the single most important human adaptation of all. You didn't wait for thicker fur before moving into cold regions. You made clothing. You didn't wait for stronger jaws to eat tough food. You invented cooking. You're not waiting for inherited immunity to every new pathogen. You're building vaccines instead. But underneath all of that cultural armor, genes are still doing their quiet arithmetic. One family has slightly more surviving children than another. One variant edges upward. Another disappears through pure chance. Somewhere in the human population alive right now, a new version of this story has probably already started, and there's no way to know which one it is yet. You are not broken. You're a population still running the same old experiment, just with better tools to watch it happen.